Let's get going. Hello, Adam.
Hey, Claire, how are you?
Good. Where are you on this fine Tuesday?
Philadelphia suburbs. Not quite as nice as Argentina, but we'll take it.
I don't know. Philadelphia suburbs is pretty nice. So you guys have, and today is the primary day, right? In
It is, yes.
Big day.
Need to vote.
Go get your sticker. All right. So, Adam, you are awesome. And I just want to read just a little bit of your bio for folks who don't already kind of know everything about you. Adam Grant is Wharton's top-rated professor and a New York Times writer on work and psychology. He has been recognized as one of the world's 25 most influential management thinkers. Harvard Review's most influential international thinker, the world's 40 best business professors under 40, and Malcolm Gladwell's favorite thinkers. So he's on lots of lists. Previously, he was a record-setting advertising director, a junior Olympic springboard diver, and a professional magician, which is crazy. Adam is the author of 2 New York Times best-selling books translated into 32 languages. The Originals explores how individuals champion new ideas and leaders fight groupthink. It is a #1 national bestseller and one of Amazon's best books of February 2016. Give and Take examines why helping others drives our success and was named one of the best books of 2013 by Amazon, Apple, the Financial Times, and the Wall Street Journal, as well as one of Oprah's riveting reads and Harvard Business Review's Ideas That Shaped Management. And Adam is one of the most generous leaders out there. Since the moment we first met over email some years ago, you have just always been sort of so kind and helpful and so attentive and responsive. But I guess you know that, right, about yourself?
just trying to rise to the standard that you set. Claire, I feel like when I email you, sometimes you even respond before I've hit send.
Oh, that's really funny.
I don't know how you do it, but funny. It's definitely challenged the rest of us to get our acts together.
Not true. So, Adam, I want to talk about I really want to talk about sort of your latest book first, essentially, just because I totally loved it, and it made me rethink a lot about the way I approach work, but also sort of the way corporations approach work, sort of on an organizational level. So I just want to dive into kind of a quote from it to start, where you say, being original doesn't require being first, it just means being different and better. And I'm wondering if you could kind of just unpack this a little bit about what this means.
Yeah, this comes to mind, especially when I think about entrepreneurs. So when I have students or people I'm advising who are trying to start companies or build nonprofits or champion any kind of new idea, they think that they have to be the first mover. And this is a pervasive belief in American culture, that if you're not first, you're basically too late. Mm-hmm. It's a great idea, with one tiny problem associated with it. It isn't true. If you actually track the evidence, more often than not, there's a first mover disadvantage. It's much easier to improve on someone else's idea than it is to create a market from scratch. And one of my favorite studies looked at over 500 companies either creating a market or improving on a product or service, and showed that the first movers had a 47% failure rate, compared with only 8% for the ones who entered later, which is pretty crazy.
That's amazing. Wow. And so as you were sort of doing research into these companies and you heard this 47% number, were you as shocked as we all were reading this, or did you kind of think it would be a different way?
No, I was totally surprised. And I felt a responsibility then to go and tell my students, like, if you're the first into a market, you should just stall for a couple of years and not, no, I'm just kidding. It's just a reminder that if you're not first, you don't have to give up. Mm-hmm. And, if you're racing somebody to get a product out, there's no point in rushing just to try to get to the finish line ahead of them, because it's not about being the first to move. As Reid Hoffman, the LinkedIn founder, likes to put it, it's about being the first to scale. And sometimes the investments you have to make to become the first mover actually make it harder for you to scale as the product or service or technology evolves.
Yeah, and I think that's totally true. Sort of when I think about Silicon Valley, and obviously many of the examples that you bring up in the book, you can think of lots of examples of that exact thing happening, or even platforms or services that we use today. Obviously, the first one coming to mind is Meerkat, I would say, right? Meerkat versus Periscope. Periscope we all love, but Meerkat was really there first, but didn't quite figure things out as they could have. I mean, we don't know the future. Meerkat could still blow things up, but yeah.
It could. But you have to wonder, right? Like, would Facebook have taken off if Friendster and MySpace hadn't paved the way for people to get used to putting their profiles on the internet and connecting with their friends? And it would have been a much tougher challenge if you had to create all of that from scratch.
And so what is happening there? Is it that the Friendster and MySpace paved the way for people to understand this sort of new way of thinking, or is it that they figured out the kind of kinks along the way in terms of the actual platform?
I think it's both. You can actually see a little bit of this in the history of video games. So I always thought that Nintendo was like the first mover when it comes to home video consoles.
Sure.
Magnavox was first. And they created a pretty like rudimentary video game system. And Nintendo had the idea of doing something similar. They ended up becoming a distributor, I think, in Japan for the Magnavox product. And they learned all about what was working and what wasn't, and then they created a dramatically better game and way of playing the system. And I think that that's what often happens, right? Like, people are getting used to the product, and you also get to work out the kinks, and you can kind of swoop in and take over.
So kind of when we think about this idea of being different and being better, there's also this concept that we really need to kind of take initiative. And there's a section in the book where, I may get this wrong, but I'll just set this up and then you can really explain it. There's a study regarding customer service representatives and basically showing that those who made sort of small tweaks, which in this case was just about kind of changing the internet browsers that they use as sort of a default on their computer, were more likely to these individuals were more likely to sort of succeed in some sort of, this being a small example of them sort of being original. Talk to me about this and fix the way I just botched that study.
No, there are a lot of people who are very uncomfortable with this study because it does suggest that what internet browser you use actually has some implications for understanding your job performance and your likelihood of quitting. So if you don't know what browser you use, you should probably go and ask Jeeves. But if you look at the evidence, this is across about 50,000 employees. You do see that Chrome and Firefox users significantly outperform Internet Explorer and Safari users, and they also stay at their jobs 15% longer. And this economist, Michael Hausman, who did this study, we were talking about the results, and at first he thought it was a technical advantage. That the Chrome and Firefox users were just more computer savvy.
Right.
But he had data on typing speed and like how much you knew about computers, no differences by browser group. What it is this is a marker of initiative, because Internet Explorer and Safari come pre-installed on your computer. And so if you're one of those browser users, you basically just accepted the default option that was handed to you. Whereas if you use Chrome or Firefox, you had to question whether there was a better option out there and then be a little bit resourceful and download that different browser. And that turns out to be a window into how you approach your job, right? So the kinds of people who said, I'm going to download a different browser. Also, when they encountered a rule that didn't make sense, instead of following it, they fixed it. When they met a customer who had a bunch of complaints, they didn't just do standard protocol. They said, all right, let me see if I can be creative and come up with a better way to address this customer's issue. And over time, they ended up customizing their jobs to create more of the jobs that they wanted, and there was less reason to leave. And, I think the conclusion is that if you want to get better at your job, you should just download Chrome or Firefox. No. It's about being the kind of person who has the instinct to do that, right?
Right. So, I mean, I remember there was some workbook 10 or 15 years ago called something like Break All the Rules. And I just remember that sort of phrase because it was a cool title. But when I think of, a storied institution like the University of Pennsylvania and Wharton in particular, and you as a professor, I would think that you kind of have to create a lot of rules that you need students to follow in order to make things work within your classroom and within your curriculum, right? So how do you kind of bring the concepts that you learned from originals into, I don't know, into real life, to encourage these business students to I don't know, push the envelope, but also follow the rules? I'm not sure.
Yeah, well, this is one of the virtues of having tenure, right?
That's awesome.
I was much more of a conformist when somebody could easily fire me. And now I'm much more likely to implement the ideas that I believe in, even if they go against the grain.
Huh.
So a couple examples come to mind. One is while I was writing originals, I started thinking about my own classroom. And I realized that on the one hand, I'm encouraging people to, question the default, to challenge the status quo. And here I am teaching a whole class on evidence-based management and how to apply data to work, where I'm basically asking students to learn all of the studies that we already know about and then put them into practice. And there was very little opportunity for the students to question, the premise of what we were studying and ask, well, when would this not be true? Or, does this really apply to my industry or my job? So I decided that I was a hypocrite and I had to do something about it. I took I decided that I was going to spend the first half of the class still really introducing students to the good evidence, because I did want them to have the best data available when making decisions. So they weren't just learning from idiosyncratic experience, but they were actually asking, what works for most of the people most of the time in a situation like this. And then, November rolls around and they kind of know everything that I think is important for them to learn about leadership and work. So what I ended up doing at that point was I assigned them to work in pairs. I added a new deliverable to the class, which was that they had to film their own mini TED Talk. Maximum 5
Awesome. Really? Was this
totally fun?
This was before your TED Talk? This was before you did yours? Okay.
Yeah, I've done this for 2 years now. So
this was also market research for your wildly successful TED Talk.
Not intentionally. I just, they always talked about their favorite TED Talks. We often use them in class to bring ideas to life. So I thought, all right, why not have them give their own talks? They paired up. They had 5 minutes to video them. They actually had a few weeks to work on them, but the final product was 5 minutes.
Right.
And it was up to them. They could choose any idea they wanted to advocate for, but it had to be counterintuitive. So it had to be original in some way. And they had to use some kind of evidence to support their principle and how it could be put into practice.
Okay.
I was just floored by the originality of the ideas that the students generated, but also the delivery methods. We had, in one case, we had students delivering, some really surprising insights about negotiation. And they had somebody dressed up as a shark who kept coming in and acting like you think negotiators are supposed to. It was hysterically funny, very memorable. And I realized that there was a lot of natural originality in the classroom, and I just wasn't giving the students a chance to unleash it. Wow. So that was a fun experience. Do you want to talk about others or move on?
I want to talk about another. Tell me another one.
All right. So my other favorite is I cannot stand forced grading curves.
Oh.
I think they're one of the worst inventions in the history of education.
Explain what these are to people who don't necessarily know.
So this is when a teacher basically sets up a bell curve for grade distribution in class. So, we're giving out a final exam, and the top 10% of grades will be A's, then the next 20% will be B's, and then 50% will be C's, and so on. And we have a lot of professors who use a forced curve, which I think is just a travesty, because if you track the data on this, there's no reason why only 10% of your students can master the material, right? And so if, I want to teach a class where everyone masters it, and the way that I try to get around that is I give a really hard exam. And if 90% of the students ace my challenging exam, then 90% of the students deserve an A. But there are a lot of professors who say, look, in my area, it's hard to know what a challenging exam is. And, I don't exactly know, where to draw the line between A and a B. And so I will just end up putting, the best students at the top, and that will sort itself for me. And I got so frustrated with that a few years ago that I said, look, aside from the fact that this is not actually accurate grading, if you have a bunch of star students who are highly motivated and know the material, it really discourages students from supporting each other and learning from each other.
Absolutely.
If I'm competing against you, Claire, for a grade, then the chances that I'm going to study with you and teach you the stuff that I know, 0, right?
Sure. Does not build collaboration in any way.
Not at all. So I just said, look, this forced curve is ridiculous. Who says that I have to grade people totally independently on exams? And I ran a little experiment where on my final exam, which was the biggest component of the student's grade, I have these really difficult multiple choice questions where, there are like 4 options, but then there are a bunch of other options, which are, it's not only A, B, C, or D, but also A and B, A and C, A and D, A, B, and C. And every combination is there so that you don't get points just for guessing. And I took a few of those questions and I said, look, some of these are going to be really hard. So pick the question that you're least sure of your answer on and write down the name of a classmate who you think knows the answer. And if they get it right, you can get their points too.
That's amazing.
It was so much fun. So the students all got together. They figured out who was an expert on what, and they actually taught each other all sorts of information. And then, on the question they didn't know, they were able to actually benefit from, knowing who knew what and helping each other study, and they all did a little better. And my hope was that we taught them a lesson that that life is not zero sum. And that was a favorite example of nonconformity.
I also love that life is not zero sum. I want to talk a little bit about this idea of risk, because in originals, I feel like you say some sort of bold things about risk and some things that people would not necessarily expect. So I just want to read kind of a couple quotes that are kind of interesting. So one of them, many entrepreneurs take plenty of risks, but those are generally the failed entrepreneurs, not the success story. Okay. And then to become original, you have to try something new, which means accepting some measure of risk. And then there's another quote, when we use the logic of consequence, we can always find reasons not to take risks, right? So I think a lot of these, or at least 3 of those, are pretty surprising things to say about risk. Tell us about sort of what you learned about risk and what it means to be original or to use risk to become original, essentially.
Yeah, I was completely stunned by this too. I always pictured highly original people, anyone who champions creativity or change. I thought those people were huge risk takers. Mm-hmm. And I thought that's what made them different from me. Mm-hmm. Right? So when you look at, the entrepreneurs who succeed, like the Richard Bransons or Bill Gates of the world, you think that they're daredevils. Mm-hmm. But then when you look at the evidence, you find out that they're not at all. Bill Gates, just as an example, there's this great hero story about him dropping out of college and going for broke to start Microsoft. But in reality, he didn't drop out of college. He took a leave of absence. He was bankrolled by his parents, and he already had a year of software sales under his belt. Mm-hmm. Doesn't sound so risky to me. Nope. You can always go back to college if it doesn't work out. Yep. And this is very much what you see when you look at these studies. My favorite one is this Raffi and Fang nationally representative study of entrepreneurs in the U.S. Thousands and thousands of entrepreneurs. What they want to know is it better to be the kind of risk taker who, when you have a big idea, you just quit your day job and you go all in? Or should you be like the more cautious entrepreneurs and say, I don't know if this idea is going to work. I don't want to put all my eggs in one basket. I'm going to keep my day job and then just start the business as a hobby on the side. And when they followed these entrepreneurs, the latter group was 33% less likely to have their businesses fail. When they hedged their bets, they were a lot more likely to make smart decisions. When their idea didn't work out, they were a lot more comfortable pivoting, as opposed to saying like, well, I just quit my job to start this business. I guess I have to make it work. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And, I think that really turned upside down my thinking about risk taking, that of course you do have to take some risks, right? As you pointed out, to be a successful entrepreneur or to do anything creative. But you don't have to be a stupid risk taker, right? You can take calculated risks. And what successful people seem to do is that they manage risk like a portfolio. So think about the stock market. If you were going to bet on a very risky stock, you would then invest your money in a bunch of very boring mutual funds to make sure you don't lose everything. Mm-hmm. And this is what I saw with successful entrepreneurs is they went out of their way to say, look, I'm gonna take a risk over here by trying out this new idea, and then I'm gonna play it safe in every other domain of my life to make sure that I have a backup plan.
Is there, I wonder, can you tell me a little bit about, does risk change depending on where we are in our career? I mean, you today, do you take less risk now that you are successful, or do you take more risk than you did when you were, in grad school at 25 or something?
I think more and less. Okay. So, the more risky part is, I have the security of tenure, and that makes me comfortable voicing opinions that I wouldn't have been willing to share earlier.
Right.
I've written articles about why the Myers-Briggs is a fad that needs to die. Emotional intelligence is overrated. We need many more men to stand up and advocate for women. These are all things that I believe strongly and have great data for, but would have shied away from earlier in my career because I would have been worried about, standing out in ways that
all the INFJs coming and stabbing you or whatever.
Exactly, which, statistically is a meaningless category. But that aside, I think the flip side of this, though, is that as you become more secure and more successful, the very risky decisions that you took actually have less risk attached to them. So, when you build up a track record of credibility, people listen to you more. And when I come out here and say, look, if you track the evidence, emotional intelligence is probably 5 times less important than cognitive ability, and there's no rigorous study that has ever shown the opposite.
Wow.
It's a lot easier for me to say that now when, I have dozens of publications and I build up this, this track record of bringing good evidence to the table, both in doing my own research and synthesizing other people's data. Right. If I had said that earlier in my career, it would have been much more risky because people would have been like, who is this guy? What does he know? And now they're just like, well, okay, maybe this guy knows other stuff, but he's got to be wrong about this one. Which is, less of a problem for my life.
That's very interesting. So so there's another line in your book that I think is kind of scary to people when we think about risk and also when we think about ownership, because I think many times when we are successful, we want to think that it was all us, obviously, or we want to inflate sort of, that is like an ingrained part of us. We are successful. But you say in Originals that timing actually accounts for 42% of the difference between success and failure. So this feels sort of depressing on the outside. It feels like we can't really, I don't know, we don't have much agency over what is going to happen or how to be successful or how to be original. Do you think that's the case? The best way to exert control over whether you're going to generate an idea that takes off or do something creative that's meaningful in its impact is to just generate a huge volume of ideas. And the reason for that is, one, we're really bad judges of our own ideas. So it's very easy to fall in love with a terrible, terrible idea that you have. 2, there's timing, as you said. And then 3, the first ideas that we have are usually the most conventional. That's why we thought of them first. And often you need to rule those out before you're free to really think differently. So, I guess if you want to exert more control, you want to follow the lead of Picasso or Shakespeare and say, look, I'm going to write hundreds of plays if I'm Shakespeare, or thousands and thousands of paintings, as part of my total body of work if I'm Picasso, and know that a lot of those are going to be bad, but a small number of them may have a shot at becoming masterpieces. I think, incidentally, the Prince, tragedy is very timely, in that, we know these incredible Prince songs, and we think about what an original artist he was and how he redefined music. And there are rumors that he has thousands of unreleased songs in his archive. Wow.
Which, I would bet that some of those are extraordinary, but a lot of them just weren't very good, because no matter how excellent you are, there's going to be variance in the quality of the work that you would churn out. And I guess exploiting that variance is the best way to take advantage of the problem associated with luck.
So it seems like what you're saying is that if a new student was coming to you and was saying, I want to be more original in my thinking in order to, try to be successful in my life, you would say that producing more or trying more is what they should be doing?
Yeah, I would say they want to double or triple the number of ideas that they generate, and then they'll have a much better shot at doing something that pans out. And, in doing that, I would encourage them to be really cautious about their own judgment. Because there's so much overconfidence among entrepreneurs and creative thinkers. And very frequently, our taste doesn't track with what our audience really likes.
Wow.
And that kind of feedback is pretty useful, especially at early stage in the game.
Yeah, and it's also, it's the type of feedback that we probably are likely to try and ignore because we want to be confident in ourselves, right?
Yeah, and there are all these people who kind of wander around saying, it's like the Steve Jobs sort of Henry Ford mantra of, if I had asked my customers what they wanted, they would have told me a faster horse.
Right.
I'm not saying you should ask your customers what they want, but you should definitely ask them what they think of your product or your service, because they're the ones that are going to buy it.
So how do you do that in your life these days? Do you, with your students, do they provide sort of a lot of the feedback that you get?
Yeah, absolutely. I put together a research lab every year where I take a bunch of the students who are curious to learn more about the topic and dive deeper into work in psychology. And when I was writing originals, they actually got together and read every single chapter. I threw away 2 chapters completely based on their feedback.
Wow.
Rewrote several more, and also had a bunch of new ideas when they asked questions that led me to say, it's a really interesting question, and that's something a lot of people care about. I actually have a point of view and some cool data on that. So yeah, students are a huge source of feedback. My wife also, she reads everything that I write, and she has the highest standards of anyone I know. So in those moments when she says, this is really good, I know I'm onto something.
Wow. Wow, that's great. So we all need to marry your wife, I guess.
I actually would take issue with that, but I would say, if you can marry someone like her, that would work out well.
Okay. Well, this has been so awesome. I thank you so much for all the time you've given me. Can you sort of tell folks what you're working on now that the originals book tour is kind of coming to a close and you're back in your home office and trying to be a little bit more in Philadelphia?
I have no idea what I'm working on now. Just trying to get like the rest of my life back in order. I'm spending most of my time right now just working on trying to continue to build cultures of giving and of originality in organizations. I would love to see more workplaces be dominated by generosity and really be, I guess, like sites where we think about creativity going to come to life as opposed to going to die.
Right.
And I think there's so many great ideas and passionate people who get sort of squashed by organizations that make it hard for people to feel like they can support each other or that they can speak up. And so I want to try to shift cultures to create more hospitable workplaces for most of us. So that'll be a focus for the next few months, and then we'll see where we go from there. How about you?
How about me? I don't know. I just sort of hang out online. Where can folks find you, Adam?
Oh, if you go to adamgrant.net, you will find everything I've ever written for free, except the books, but there are chapters available on those, which is as much as we're allowed to share. And there are also some fun assessments where you can take a quiz to test your knowledge on what it takes to be original. You can get rated by people who know you on whether you're a giver, taker, or matcher. Ooh. I'd say try that at your own risk, because you might not like the person staring back at you in the mirror.
Wow. Well, thank you so much. This was awesome, and you rock.
Thank you. Wonderful to see you.